Hey everyone, and welcome back to Hoopers Nation, your top destination for NBA basketball content. After advancing all the way to last year's Western Conference Finals before eventually losing to the Golden State Warriors, the Portland Trailblazers came into the 2019-2020 season with high expectations. Unfortunately, things weren't clicking in Rip City early on. 1 month into the season, they had an ugly 5-12 record, and there were more questions than answers for a team that had struggled with starting center Jusuf Nurkic out due to injury. It was around this time when the Blazers signed Carmelo Anthony to a 1-year deal, and since then went 24-25 before the season was suspended due to the coronavirus pandemic. But coming into the bubble with a well-rested and recovered roster and a possibility to make the NBA playoffs, the Blazers were poised on demonstrating to the rest of the league why last year's playoff run was no fluke. They did just that behind some stellar performances by NBA bubble MVP Damian Lillard, and a Portland team that looked as motivated as ever. They managed to advance to the 2020 NBA playoffs as the 8th seed, and now will face the #1 regular season team in the West, the Los Angeles Lakers, in their first round of postseason play. The Portland Trailblazers are one of the most scorching hot teams coming into the 2020 NBA playoffs, and it only takes a quick look over the stat sheet to see why. They went 6-2 in their seeding games, with those lone 2 defeats coming at the hands of the Boston Celtics and Los Angeles Clippers by a margin of 4 and 3 points respectively. Since the restart, they led the league in scoring at 126 points per game, were second in threes made per game at 15.4, third in three-point percentage at 41.4%, second in free throw percentage at 84.3%, and averaged only 11 turnovers, the lowest mark in the bubble. Now, this excellent brand of team was of course fueled by some great individual performers. Damian Lillard was already having quite the season, but he recently took it to a whole nother level. One of his motivations behind this was his renewed beef with Skip Bayless. If you haven't seen our video telling the whole story between Lillard and Bayless, you can find the link in the description. Anyways, Lillard went berserk in the season restart. He averaged 37.6 points, 9.6 assists, and 1.4 steals per game, all while shooting 49.7% from the field and 43.6% from 3. He was obviously the team leader in scoring, followed by the usual suspects CJ McCollum and Jusuf Nurkic at the 2nd and 3rd spots. But the next guy on their scoring list was a big surprise and enters the playoffs as perhaps the biggest NBA bubble revelation. Trent Jr. had averages of 7.7 points per game on 42.6% overall shooting and 38.8% from deep at the time of the regular season stoppage. But during the Blazers' 8 bubble games, Trent bumped his numbers up to an average of 16.9 points on 51.6% shooting and 50.7% from 3. He was especially impressive from three-point land, and even when he went a bit colder from deep in the Blazers' last couple games, he shot 28 for 45 from 3 through their first 5 games, an insane 62.2 accuracy rating from long range. He shot 28 for 45 from 3 through the first 5 games, an insane 62.2% accuracy rate from long range. Another under-the-radar contributor for the Blazers in the bubble was Carmelo Anthony, and even though his scoring numbers weren't much different from those of the rest of the regular season, he was making shots at a much more efficient rate. Melo went from scoring 15.3 points a night on 42.6% field goal percentage and 37.1% from 3 to 16.5 points on 45.6% overall shooting and an impressive 46.9% from deep range. Anthony essentially took the same amount of threes per game, but made them at a much better rate. There's not much else the Blazers can ask from the former scoring champion that he gives them as much scoring in the most efficient ways as possible. The Blazers deserve a lot of credit for their success inside the bubble, considering they came into the restart without 2 key members of their supporting cast, Trevor Ariza and Rodney Hood. Ariza opted to sit out during the Orlando restart, while Hood is recovering from a torn left Achilles. Each averaged 11 points per game in the regular season, and both were 40+% shooters from 3, something that would have certainly given the Trailblazers extra weapons on their arsenal to fight their competition in the bubble. Now, while the Blazers were very successful and looked impressive in their restart, we can't say that much about the Los Angeles Lakers. They got a statement win over the Clippers in their bubble opener, clinched the #1 seed in the West by beating the Jazz, and got one last win over the Nuggets, dropping the rest of their games for a 3-5 record. The Lakers averaged the second to lowest amount of points as a team with 106.4 per game, barely edging a Wizards squad that was by far the worst team in the bubble. The Lakers were also dead last in three-point shooting at 30.3%, last in free throw percentage at 72.4%, second to last in assists with 21.6 per game, as well as second to last in team plus-minus with a -7. The advanced stats don't paint the picture any better, as the Lakers had a -6.6 net rating in their 8 seeding games. In summary, had the Wizards not been invited to the bubble, the Lakers would have ranked last in many of the team basketball statistics. Looking at the individual stats, it's easy to see what's behind the mediocre at best play by the Lakers. But by far the most disappointing performer has to be Anthony Davis. The superstar big man failed to capitalize on some really good matchups and looked far from the perennial MVP candidate he was playing as before the season stoppage. For more on the Lakers' woes, you can check out the recent video in which we discuss discuss whether the Lakers are in deep trouble. The link will be down below in the description. But how big of a threat are the Blazers to the Lakers? When you go back to these teams' 3 previous encounters in the regular season, the Lakers won the head-to-head battle 2-1. The common factor in all 3 games was Damian Lillard and Anthony Davis delivering some masterful performances. In 3 matchups versus the Lakers, Lillard averaged 36 points, 9 assists, and 6 rebounds, shooting 50.8% from the field and 39.4% from 3. Against the Blazers, Davis averaged 32 points, 11.3 rebounds, 4.3 assists, 2.6 blocks, and 1.7 steals on 55.9% overall shooting and 40% from deep. Kyle Kuzma, as well as the Lakers' big man duo of Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee, found big success against the Blazers too, with LeBron playing up to his usual standards in all 3 games as well. For Portland, it was Hassan Whiteside who was overly impressive in their series, averaging 22 points, 13 rebounds, and 3.3 blocks on 75.7% shooting from the field. But besides him and Lillard, the rest of Portland's supporting cast was a step behind, namely CJ McCollum and Carmelo Anthony, who didn't shoot particularly well against the Lakers. It is worth noting that starting center Jusuf Nurkic did not play in any of these 3 games, as he was still out recovering due to injury. Nurkic's presence in the first round of the 2020 NBA playoffs will perhaps be the big, key differentiator if the Blazers want to pull an upset. Not only on the offensive end, where Nurkic has proven capable of doing more than his fair share of the inside scoring, but especially on the defensive end, where holding down Anthony Davis will be the main focus for the Trailblazers. Nurkic may be the most likely candidate to deal with the Anthony Davis problem, but the Blazers may even have a bigger problem, a playoff mode LeBron James problem. We saw Gary Trent Jr. commonly picking up the opposition's toughest assignment for Portland, guarding big-name stars like Paul George out on the perimeter. Not to discredit Trent's outstanding efforts, but James is a different type of beast. As time has passed by, James is yet to disappoint when it comes to postseason play. He's perhaps the most reliable playoffs performer there is in the NBA. But until we see LeBron slowing down, it's tough to bet against him. We'll see whether Trent or anyone else can do anything to stop the King. One big plus for the Lakers during the regular season was Avery Bradley's defensive presence on the wing. He's a big part of why CJ McCollum struggled against LA in their 3 games this season. But the Lakers find themselves without their defensive specialist in the bubble. Good luck trying to contain both Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum without him. The closest thing to Bradley the Lakers have is Danny Green, but he hasn't looked much like the Spurs version of him lately. Green will be very busy switching between Lillard and McCollum, and probably Carmelo Anthony as well. So if the Lakers are to stop the Blazers' offensive onslaught, they're going to need the whole roster, including the 35-year-old James, fully committed on the defensive end. The Lakers didn't have much motivation to play any outstanding basketball in their seeding games, as they had the number 1 seed locked in and the rest of their games were mostly warm-ups for the playoffs. It's entirely possible that they were playing lazy and loose before the real competition started for them. And historically speaking, betting against LeBron James in the playoffs hasn't ended up well either. If the Lakers cannot switch into playoff mode starting with Game 1, and the Blazers pick up right where they left off at the end of their seeding games, then we're in for a long series. So unless the Lakers come into the series fully focused and locked in, the Blazers' odds at pulling one of the biggest upsets in the last decade are very real. If you watch the Blazers play during the seeding games, you know that they're a threat. But what version of the Lakers are we going to get in the first round of the playoffs? That's going to determine who advances to the Western Conference semifinals. Will the Trailblazers be able to pull off the upset? Are the Lakers too tough to beat in the playoffs? Will Damian Lillard continue his dominating scoring performances in the postseason? Will Anthony Davis be able to unleash the monster inside him? Make sure to comment your thoughts down below, as well as leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel. I'll see you on the next one.